Hello, Internet. Gino, that Pinguino Grieco here again with another episode of Deep Listens. Joining me, as always, for our bi-weekly video game book club podcast thing that we do. I guess that's how you would describe it, right? Right, Billy? Billy Rothert, video game expert, video gamesman.
I mean, if you're going to call me anything about video games, I think aficionado would be the word that I'd choose for myself. Anyway, hey everybody, my name is Billy Rothert. I am also known as Rothgar in just about any gaming circle you have seen or heard of me in. Today we're talking about Thomas Was Alone, which is a neat little gem. I'm pretty excited to get into some of the details about this title.
And joining me for this podcast as well, as always, is the basketball doctor, Peter Busby.
What's going on, everybody? I want to say it now. In today's era of positional flexibility, if you put Team Jump on the court, they would win the NBA Finals tonight. That's a squad. That's a five-man unit. I'd go to war.
Jump.
Team Jump is just positional. They're 5 point guards, but they just play so well together. Their teamwork
They're
is
also
masterful.
5 forwards and 5
Incredible
centers.
athleticism. It's astounding.
They're so agile.
They'd make one great center. They all sit on top of one another.
That's true. And so if you didn't get it from what we were talking about, we are going to be discussing Thomas Was Alone this week on the podcast, an awesome indie game that I have had on my backlog for so long, and I'm so glad that this podcast exists to help me get it off of that backlog. So before we actually get into Thomas Was Alone, we have feedback this week.
Woo!
Feedback!
Hooray. We're not just throwing this out into the void. Well, we are, but like stuff's
void
coming
is
back
shouting
at us. The void is shouting back.
The void is looking back into us and asking us questions.
First things first, we got a lot of the feedback was on our Dota 2 episode, playing like a girl in esports. And so first bit of feedback comes from Slag on giantbomb.com. He says, "This was easily my favorite episode you guys have put out. Very cool stuff. I'm pretty amazed the Polygons of the world haven't talked to Haya, as far as I can tell. Kudos to you guys for a great get and a great way to cover Dota 2 in your format. Timely, too. It kind of ties right into a new VR project about street harassment." And so he linked to a motherboard piece. It is basically a VR game. It's called It's Not a Compliment. And I actually read the piece, and its main thrust is a woman created a virtual reality game that kind of puts you in the eyes of a woman walking down the street, getting catcalled. And it's really well designed that you're actually shorter and smaller than all of the men around you who are shouting at you, and it's supposed to simulate what it feels like. It's a really cool article. And then he said, maybe tech is going to give society the means to teach us menfolk a little bit more empathy. And then just some general critiques about interviewing. Maybe Haya should have been interviewing us, which I think is fair criticism. Thank you, Slag. Next time we have a guest and they're an expert, they should be asking us more questions. So what did you guys think about the VR project, like using technology as a way to teach people empathy?
It's certainly an interesting juxtaposition, right? When you think about sort of historically what we've pointed to separate people from, robots, machines, what have you, typically emotions at the front lines of that battle, right? But it's interesting to look at it more sort of less as a dichotomy and more of a synergistic exercise, right? As opposed to positing like we have emotions and technology doesn't. It's interesting to see that interplay, how we can enhance each other in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Billy, any thoughts?
Well, if the idea is supposed to be like a virtual reality simulation of sort of stepping into someone else's shoes, I actually kind of liked what we did in the Dota podcast a little bit better, because rather than maybe having a gameplay experience that is simulated and the player is the subject upon which things act upon you, the player, in a certain way. I liked being a person that I was influencing the behavior of someone else and understanding how that worked. I felt like I had more control. And it seems like, I guess that's kind of weird to say, if you want to step into someone else's shoes, you should not want to have control over your experiences. You want to sort of really feel what it's like to be someone else, maybe be a little bit out of control, out of your comfort zone. But I liked when we did the Dota podcast that it was like, I guess I was the variable instead of the entire environment around me being the variable. Does that make
And
sense?
yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. Basically, that in the case of this virtual reality game, it's really constructed to put you into this experience. Not so much that you are actually interacting with harassers the way we were when we were playing Dota, but it's set up to kind of simulate that harassment. Whereas in our Dota example, we were able to actually, to the best of our ability, step into that role organically. And so we got to see it true to life without having to question how much of this is real, how much of it is constructed by the author of the game to make us feel a certain way. Instead, we were, as much as we could, stepping into the shoes of a female Dota player.
And I wouldn't want to tear down this VR experience just because maybe some parts of it are simulated and therefore less organic. I think it could be an incredibly new and an innovative way to get this kind of this idea into people's heads. But from my perspective, I just enjoyed the Dota version of it better. Like, that's how I like to set up an experiment to test something. I like to be the one that's enacting the change instead of putting me as a constant just into new environments and seeing how I react.
I mean, really, it's a venerable project. It's really just, I shouldn't say just, it's an extension of sort of the, like, when people make moral justifications for literature, this is the sort of argument they make, right? It enhances empathy. It allows you to interact with people you otherwise wouldn't get to. I mean, virtual reality is a nice way to potentially extend that into other sensoriums, let's say.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things is it's not practical to apply the Dota experiment to a lot of different life experiences. It'd be very difficult to, in real life, dress you as a woman, knock you down 3 inches or 5 inches,
Right.
and then have you walk down the street. That's not a situation that we can really put together. And within a game, even then, I know that there are games like, there's a game called Rust, where there's an interesting dichotomy. It's a game where you basically start naked in the wilderness and you're supposed to survive. It's kind of a survival game. But your race is completely randomized. And so they've actually found that players playing Rust, like, different tribalisms have just sprung up organically, because some people are just, their characters created black or their characters created white, and the differences in your skin tone have actually caused people to behave a certain way. And so that can also be kind of that empathy generating experience where it's kind of organic. But other than setting up a society and then having kind of sexism propagate naturally, if you want to control the experience and show it true to life without having kind of the forces of the internet playing into it, I think that authoring the experience and letting a person step into it is a really good way of trying to bridge that gap without leaving all of it up to the chaos of people playing your game. You're basically trying to explain, this is my experience, and I'm going to show you it as best I can, instead of saying, I'm going to set up this system where my experience will replicate itself organically. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, they're subtly different purposes in either case. So you need different methodologies to arrive at them. Yep.
So thank you, Slag, for that article. That game looks really awesome, and if I ever get an Oculus, that's something I'm going to have to check out. Right now it's just a demo, but it seems like something that's very interesting. And we also got feedback on our website about the Dota 2, the Dota 2 episode. So first we have a comment from Ryan. One, I would definitely have to agree that the learning curve for Dota is really rough. You lose gold when you get killed. The ability to freeze the lane by getting last hits or creeps and denying and stacking, camps and jungling. All those things are very complicated. League's community isn't that much better when it comes to toxicity, and the tutorial system was a little bit better. So you have to get to level 30 before you can play ranked matches in League. And he remembers getting flamed a lot in Cyrillic and verbally abused in Russian. And he also said thanks to Billy for helping him learn how to play Dota. So basically agreeing that Dota 2 is a pretty rough game. But also League is also pretty rough with its Billy, your mic is off.
Like the whole genre of MOBAs is just designed to be not not inclusive. I
Yeah.
mean, any MOBA. I mean, I can't actually think of a single one. I mean, the closest ones that come to mind is like Heroes of the Storm is pretty user friendly. I mean, you're still gonna get flamed if you're bad at the game, but the game has built-in mechanics so that if you're new, you're not gonna immediately make your whole team lose because you're bad. Like your other teammates can
carry you.
Can carry the weight for you way better than in a game of Dota, where if you pick a hero that you're bad at that role, the game just falls apart and your whole team loses and everyone hates you. Smite is a little bit
Smite?
different kind of
Yeah, but isn't
MOBA.
Smite a third-person action game with
It's a MOBA.
with MOBA conventions?
Everything about it is a MOBA except for the camera angle.
Yeah, but aren't you controlling it as a third person? Like the control scheme is very different, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be. You can map the controls to be MOBA-like, but still, when people play MOBAs, you can still map the keys so that other MOBAs play like Smite. One of my former teammates when I played in Dota maps the controls really differently, and it plays more like a tabletop strategy type game than it does a MOBA. But what I'm saying is, when you talk about a genre being welcoming to new players, I think the two ones that probably, it's still not great, but are best is like Smite and Heroes of the Storm, because Smite has multiple different game modes where it's by nature casual, but still excellent to learn the mechanics. So no one cares if you're bad at that game mode and you can learn how to play. And Heroes of the Storm has multiple different objectives that lead to win conditions, and there's built-in game mechanics that say, hey, look, if one of your players is not performing very well, it's not going to destroy your entire team. For example, in that game, experience and stuff is like shared across all teammates. So as long as someone is standing in a lane soaking up experience, the whole team benefits from that lane's experience. Like it's just shared amongst all your teammates. So no one's ever under-leveled.
Yeah, so in Dota, if you're Pete, since you haven't played Dota, if you are at any point not getting experience or not standing near conflict,
you're just falling behind.
You're actually actively hurting yourself.
Right.
Yay, MOBAs.
Yeah, that explains a lot.
We got another comment from Delphine. Few facts that you need to get straight. No one has 9,000 MMR yet, and the chess human versus computer performances. From my understanding, humans have no chance of winning versus a computer anymore. So that's good.
Yeah, pretty
fact
much
checking. Also thinks that we deviated a little too much on the Dota chit chat, but they enjoyed the basketball and chess comparisons.
Yes. All right.
The Kobe Bryant of Dota is Tinker. Tinker is Kobe.
Oh, really?
Tinker's Kobe. Nature's Prophet is also Kobe, probably.
They're all just Kobe.
Actually, it's probably Medusa. Except Kobe's relevant at all stages of the game. Medusa's just a closer. And we have one other thing. So if you, as I say all the time, if you want to get at us for comments, you can do @thatpinguino on Twitter. You can hit us up. I guess you can leave comments on the website. People are doing that now.
Yeah.
On deeplistens.libsyn.com. You could also hit it up on Giant Bomb. I post it on my blog, That Pinguino. I post the episodes all the time. But you should also rate and review on iTunes, because that's where a lot of people download, and it helps algorithms and whatnot. And someone actually did it.
It helps algorithms.
It helps algorithms. And just a reminder, do like this person did. You want the 5-star one. That's the one you want. So, Meowie Meow
Meowie
said,
meow?
I'm extremely impressed with this show so far, and I really hope it continues. I listen to every episode the day it comes out. So thank you, Meowie Meow.
Thank
Meow.
you.
You're our favorite listener right now. Other people, step your games up. We're not going to read all the reviews of the podcast on iTunes, but I thought that the first one, way to go, guys.
Meowie meow earned it.
Yes. Also, that's a fun name to say.
I'm hoping they'll just get longer with each review. First one's meow meow. Next one's meowie meow meow. Meowie meow 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 meow. Let's try to do that system.
Change your username when you review this and add that just make it longer and longer and make it super and super. If you do that, I will read your review. All right. So without further ado, let's start discussing Thomas Was Alone.
Let's do it.
So the first thing, let's just say with the game. The game is a 2D platformer. You play as a bunch of rectangles and squares and quadrilaterals that are trying to kind of end up in certain positions in the level. You start at one point, and then there's kind of a silhouette and outline where you have to end up. And by getting to those positions, you advance from level to level.
Up and to the right.
Yes, go up and to the right. But the really cool thing is that all these different quadrilaterals have personalities, and they have very different skill sets, and they manage to imbue a complete story of these characters coming into consciousness and then growing using only quadrilaterals and colors for the most part, and jumping mechanics. And so I wanted to just first start by saying, like, what did you guys think of the aesthetic design decision to have this game be solely quadrilaterals with some color and some size differences, and that's it in terms of the visual components?
I think it's, first off, I mean, props to him. It's a gorgeous game, right? Even just with these quadrilaterals and sort of the minimalistic backgrounds. And I mean, combined with the music, it's just absolutely gorgeous. But I think this fits in, sort of the minimalist design fits into sort of these larger points about personality, right? I feel like this is maybe just a very pure expression of sort of a heroic cipher thing. And I think it's helped by the 7 characters. Like, each one has a distinct personality that I think, because the design's so minimal, it encourages the player to map him or herself onto one of these quadrilaterals, right? I see it as almost sort of a quasi-personality test going on. Like, which quadrilateral are you? And I think the minimalist design aids that.
So which quadrilateral are you guys?
I think I'm John.
I mean, you've definitely got the
I think I'm John.
the vertical inclination.
You're very proud of your height.
I am. I'm very John.
I think I'm Thomas.
Yeah.
I think I'm optimistic, and kind of my observations sometimes upset people.
I was gonna say, like, the fact that you have notes right now, that's very Thomas.
Yes. Billy, who are you?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Claire?
I feel like I'm
Chris?
a Paul, actually.
Billy's gray, just waiting to betray us.
I feel like I'm a Paul. I feel like I'm the wise old man.
Yeah, Paul's a good one.
Paul's good.
Paul shows up way later.
But he tries to sacrifice himself to save everyone.
I would totally do that. That's actually a very me thing to do.
If anyone ever attacks our podcast, hopefully you sacrifice yourself.
I will stand and defend. I guess I relate a lot to James and Paul. James is the, like, inverted Thomas.
Yeah, James is upside down, yeah.
James is green.
James is cool.
So, go ahead, Billy.
Well, yeah, I felt myself relating to James. I felt myself relating to Paul from who do I project myself onto. Characters that I like the most, probably Claire.
Mm-hmm.
I think Claire's my favorite character.
Yeah, I think that one of the really interesting things about the design of Thomas Was Alone is when we say minimalism, usually we mean, like, just visually. But it's amazing that the mechanics of this game, they used basically every part of the shape, the jump, and maybe like one or two other things to communicate personality on top of the narration. So you get Thomas, you have a narrator basically telling you what Thomas thinks. And Thomas is optimistic, Thomas is observational. He's also of average height, he's red, he moves relatively quickly, he jumps decently high. He's kind of your baseline.
He's like your Mario.
Yeah,
he's like the Mario of the game. Like, just kind of all around pretty good at just about everything, but never really excels at any particular role.
Exactly. And then you have Chris, who is short, he's brown, he's a square. He's super self-conscious.
He's square, isn't he?
Yeah.
Just a square, honestly.
He's just a square. He's short, he's super slow, he jumps really like really low to the ground, his jump actually sounds like crappy.
It sounds just like straight up bad, honestly.
It's a sad
Thomas's
jump.
has a little bit of a pep in his step, and Chris is just kind of meh.
And he, like, you can understand why he's super self-conscious and he kind of resents the other characters because he's the slowest and the lowest jump. And in a world where all you have is jumps and size and that
dimension,
and that's it, like, he's just like, why am I the one?
What a great intro for a movie. In a world where all you have is jumps.
and height.
And
I mean, I think the intro to Chris, I mean, this is going to be kind of, like, no kidding, right, Billy? Like, the intro to Chris is probably the most poignant intro. That's where you get, well, I don't know. I think Claire's intro is my favorite intro, but Chris's intro does the best at explaining what Chris is in the shortest amount of time. Because we see Chris, and as soon as Chris meets Thomas, he says, look at this guy jumping about like he owns the place with his better jump than me. And, you know, I was doing just fine by myself until this clown comes along. He's kind of just
jump slightly higher than I can.
Yeah, just kind of a negative person. Like he's that guy in your friend group that you're just like, like he hangs around with us, but like, you know, we don't really invite him anywhere. He just kind of shows up. It's Chris.
Just talk shit to everyone all the time.
Yeah, not even behind their back like a decent person. Just like they're right there.
Yeah, and then you have John, who's tall and skinny and can jump the highest. You have Claire, who's gigantic and blue.
But she can swim.
Has the highest area of all.
She has the largest area, and she also can float, which leads her to be super confident. John's super confident because he can jump, and he's super cocky. Claire gets super confident because she can float and she thinks she has a superpower because she's the only one who can float.
Like, let me just talk about this. This is my favorite part of the game. The level that introduces Claire is, I mean, John doesn't really get any introduction. John just kind of shows up and is like, hey, I'm tall, I jump super high. What's up? Yeah. But Claire's introduction level was amazing.
I loved Claire's introduction.
I mean, she was standing on this tall platform and it was kind of like rainy and like it was, you know, just kind of sad looking, and the platform starts crumbling, and the narrator, who we should talk about soon, you know, says through Claire's voice, well, this is it. This is how I die. Life wasn't that much anyway for me, you know, kind of lame.
I can barely jump.
I can barely jump. I'm kind of big and
the only like social status in this world.
Yeah, like my jump is super weak. You know, I'm not very fast. I'm kind of clunky. And we see every other character in the game dies as soon as they touch water. And when their platform is collapsing and we see that there's water below, Claire finally falls into the water and she says, hey, I'm not dead. And the narrator says that's when Claire realized she has superpowers. It was like the most moment of the game.
Yep, and Claire just, from that moment on, Claire realized she had to find a nemesis.
Yeah.
For a superhero should have a nemesis.
Chris was the obvious choice.
Chris was a jerk.
He's plotting against all of them.
The diabolical Christopher.
Yes. And then you get all these other introductions. You get Laura, who's wide and short, and she also has a crappy jump, but she works as a trampoline.
She's like a springboard.
That's why her and Chris are soulmates.
Yep, Chris can't jump.
I actually like that development a lot, giving Chris a romantic interest.
But I love that the romantic interest is because Laura, like, not only because they spend time together and they're both similar height and kind of slowness, but also he can experience jumping when he's
through her. He reaches new heights. It's a rom-com waiting to happen, guys.
But it's crazy. They made a metaphor with just jump mechanics. They took this like simple narration and these quadrilaterals, and by applying like 3 mechanics, they were able to articulate why these two would be in love. That's amazing. I think that's so much. It's really deft work.
That is.
We also have James, who is inverted. He falls up, and he's a weirdo.
He's exactly what Thomas is, but opposite in every way. You know, green is the color wheel
Opposite of
opposite of red, and he falls up instead of down. Same jump, same momentum, same everything, but just gravity is backwards for James.
And he doesn't like other people because people constantly judge him about his falling the wrong direction.
He's different.
We also get Sarah, who's purple.
Yeah.
And she can double jump, and she's hyperactive, and so she's the fastest character.
Super
and
peppy. She's like that, like pixie cheerleader, like kind of character.
Yep, and she wants all the information. She wants all knowledge.
Well, we could almost introduce the DLC characters now, if you don't mind, because they actually relate. Some of the characters knew one another before they entered into this group. So we just introduced 7 characters, right?
Yep, those are the main 7.
Those are the main 7. They get a special name. They're called the Architects. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But there are other characters that we get introduced to in the game. And, for example, there's a set of DLC missions, and I don't know if they're DLC like they were an afterthought of the game or if they were intended because they're referenced, if you pay attention, in the original story. And their stories get fleshed out in the DLC missions. There's like 2 story arc DLC missions, so like 10 or 20 levels, where you're playing with this character named Benjamin and his dad. And Benjamin's ability and his dad, they're basically just standard jumpers, right? His dad is pretty knowledgeable and wise. He knows of this place called the fountain or the source or whatever. That's the first time we actually have an AI interacting with the, I don't know what you would call it, the source or like the light, right?
Is that the internet or?
Yeah, the internet.
Okay.
That's the first time we have an AI interacting with it. So Benjamin's dad builds him. I don't know if build's really the right term, but maybe codes a new ability for Benjamin, and it's jetpack ability.
What?
So he starts flying around with jetpack mechanics, and it plays similar to like that. What was that, like Flash game from like 1997, like helicopter game? Yeah, it was basically a helicopter game.
That was the most recent one, yeah.
Where you have to like, fly up and down the level, don't hit the spikes, travel through a maze. But he actually reaches the internet, right? He was one of the first people to reach it. I'm pretty sure he reaches the internet, I should say, and Sarah's there along the way. Sarah
In the internet?
And Laura, actually.
Hello, internet.
They don't get to the internet, but Benjamin does. Sarah and Laura are both there. Because if you remember how Laura is introduced, she says, like, there were others, but they got eaten by the pixel cloud.
Yes.
Or like, no. She says that they just ditched me, but she didn't know that they had actually been eaten by the pixel cloud.
Yeah.
Laura actually shows up in Benjamin's story, and so does Sarah. When Benjamin meets Laura and Sarah, first of all, Sarah's like the peppy, jumpy one. She's like, sweet jetpack, dude. And Benjamin's like, oh, cute fangirl over here, like showing off all my new moves too. That was a really cool part of the story because we get another layer of Sarah development, and this new character Benjamin is basically like I guess he's like a teenager male because he's very childish in in his outlook on stuff. But I thought it was neat that the original 7 characters get some of them do. They get another layer of storytelling through the DLC that they actually had interaction with other AI before they met up with the original architect. I thought that was really cool.
That's cool. I didn't play through the DLC, but that sounds like something I'd want to check out. I also think it's really cool how, like I said, everything is used. At certain points, people's jump height is super significant. At some certain points, their actual height is significant because you have to stack characters on top of one another. Sometimes their width is really significant because you have to reach a distant platform. And sometimes their additional abilities like floating or bouncing and that kind of stuff plays in. So all parts of this very simple system are used to kind of vary up the gameplay and also communicate these different character relationships. I haven't seen a game that tries to use the shape of a character quite that much. Usually a character is just an avatar for the player, and what they look like is largely irrelevant. Sometimes it communicates some story with because there's something about society that, that's communicated by the way that character looks. But in a game that's this minimalistic, to also impart gameplay significance, emotional resonance, and to some extent create kind of societal expectations of these characters all through shape, height, jump. It's really cool. I like it a whole lot.
You like it lots.
I like it lots.
Very cool. Like very much.
Good stuff. Thumbs up.
Yep. So Billy, you wanted to talk about the narrator a little bit?
Yeah. So, this, I need to kind of understand if I'm gonna think of it as positively or negatively, but what I'm thinking about with the narrator is there's two parts of this game. when it really boils down to what makes this game, there's two pieces involved. There is the gameplay with the quadrilaterals and the storytelling of the narrator. If you separated these two things, they could almost still they could almost stand alone. You could have this person telling the story without the gameplay, and you'd still get a lot out of it. The gameplay itself was really just an elaborate page-turning system in a sort of a visual novel.
I want to
disagree.
Push back there.
Okay, well, let me finish the rest of the thought.
Ahead.
So, the gameplay by itself plays just like any game of its style, like Super Meat Boy or Run Through the Castle or whatever Flash game that is start at point A, get to point B by dodging obstacles, right? So I think that using what we had, which was super basic game aesthetics, even though they were beautiful, they were basically just color palettes on two-dimensional shapes, and a super basic goal in mind, get from point A to point B with, granted, a pretty developed and intuitive physics engine. It was actually one of the more impressive physics engines. I think people had commented, or there had been reviews about this, saying that this was one of the best jump mechanics, physics mechanics we have seen in a long time, strictly because the game was programmed very well and was very polished. But what I want to, I guess, talk about is the narrating was amazing. It essentially made the whole story for me. And I wonder if that's putting too many eggs in one basket into this kind of like gimmick of here's a great story, here's your gameplay needed to advance the story. Because I think if you take away the narrator, or maybe have the narrator not be as strong, the game actually kind of falls apart, and it's not that impressive.
So the reason why I'm going to push back is that, like I said, the narration, where the narrator is kind of telling you what these characters think in their voice, I think the way that it syncs up with the character's abilities kind of causes those things to tie together. Like, you could have Chris, knowing what Chris says and then seeing what Chris looks like and the way Chris controls and seeing how those sync up with one another, I think that ties the narration to the gameplay. And also, I think that the gameplay, it's very unique for a platformer because it is cooperative. There is no enemy in Thomas Was Alone. All of the enemies are hazards. They are environmental hazards. You're not killing anything. You're not trying to destroy anything. You're not trying to save, a character necessarily. You're trying to go up and to the right for the most part. And to do that, instead of getting over a series of progressively more difficult jumps or more difficult obstacles, getting power-ups like you would in a Mario game or other typical platformers, oftentimes what you're doing is you're navigating, I guess we didn't mention this, but you're controlling multiple characters at once in Thomas Was Alone in a way that you don't in other platformers.
You could be controlling up to like 7 or 8 different characters, and you cycle through who moves when.
Yes. And so
all real time.
Yeah. And so you're cycling through these characters. So early on, you just have Thomas, then you'll have Thomas and Chris, then you'll have Thomas and Chris and John, and it keeps expanding, and the rosters, these characters get split up and then rejoined. And it's really interesting because each of these characters, oftentimes when you have to get to different points on the map, each of them need to cooperate in some way, or they have to get to areas that only they could get to. And I think it kind of showcases these personality differences and showcases how these characters come to rely on one another in a physical metaphor. So Chris, in a lot of cases, when you have Thomas and Chris and John, you have to get Chris to a very high point that he could never jump to by himself. And as a result, you have to kind of learn, I thought of it as a set of stairs. You have to kind of turn Thomas and John into stairs for Chris. So Chris has to jump on Thomas and then jump on John and then jump on Thomas who's standing on John to then get up. And so you kind of set up this elaborate thing where John could always just get there by himself. Thomas could get there with just John. But for Chris, he needs all of these people to be around to get him to the objective. And so, and by getting, if you make John and Thomas kind of get ahead and ditch Chris, you can't finish the level. And so you have this metaphor where you need all of these characters to be cooperating effectively to actually win, even though there are some characters who could, in theory, get to the end by themselves. They have all the tools to excel on their own. And so I thought that metaphor really played into the story that the narrator is telling you. That there are these characters who are kind of coming together and learning and growing together. And the metaphor of playing through that did a whole lot for me. And I think it tied it all.
So let me take a new angle because I want to kind of hold firm on this. I think, and this might be taking too far of a step, but you turn on the subtitles so you can hear the story, right? But play the game like muted so that the narrator's voice just isn't that particular voice actor, and that voice actor is a popular voice actor. He's been in other games and other stuff. If you just don't have that particular voice actor, I think you lose a lot. I think you lose more than what how am I going to phrase this? Like, whatever percentage of the architecture of the game the voice actor plays, I think you lose more than his share. I think he carries more than his share of the game. The game's success because he did an excellent oral performance, like audio experience.
He kills it on the jokes. He kills it on.
He absolutely kills it, right? So if it was anybody else, if it was not narrated as well, the game I think would just not be as good.
I agree.
And you're right. So
I'm not disagreeing that the narrator he's great and I think the writing's very strong. I'm more disagreeing that the two elements aren't deeply interwoven. I think that the game's
You think they're like
cohesive.
inseparable?
I think so. I would argue that if Chris didn't look and behave and jump and control the way he does, his personality wouldn't be as cohesive. The narration wouldn't make as much sense. If Chris looked like John and controlled like John, I wouldn't understand why he's so crabby and jealous of Thomas. But because of the way the game plays, it all kind of organically coalesces. Pete, you have any thought on this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. If
you think who's right?
Billy, you're wrong.
Oh my God!
If it's
I'm going to take a step further later.
I don't necessarily want to say it's inseparable. That might be a little strong, but it's definitely symbiotic, right? Each of these things are playing off each other, right? Sort of the structure of the characters themselves feed into those narrative descriptions. In terms of just characterization, though, I have sort of the same problem, albeit to a slightly lesser extent because it's not so overtly, what's the word? Parabolistic. I don't know.
You can just make up words. You do it all the time, dude.
It's not as much of a parable as Talos Principle was, but I have the same sort of problem where they're mapping these very human motivations, characteristics, relationship structures, sort of body-based self-esteem issues on these quadrilaterals. And I mean, it's funny. It fits the game, the style of the game and everything. I just like to complain about anthropocentrism. Right, when we're just too focused on the human, and I see
made up like 4 words in that argument, dude. Way to go!
He only made up one.
Yeah, parabolistic. I made up, but
I don't think that's a word.
No, it's not.
I think didactic is the
word there. Thank you. That's what I wanted. But like the fact that we're doing this, like in the Talos Principle, at least they were androids, right? They were humanoid robots. Now they're just quadrilaterals.
They're just little squares and rectangles and stuff.
They aren't androids until you beat them.
Yeah.
Well, let's not spoil the Talos Principle in in this game, in this episode.
We spoiled it once before. We don't have to spoil it again.
Yeah, but they're AIs in the Talos Principle.
Yeah.
But I think that it helps communicate. So,
let me take it a step further.
I want to talk
push
about
a little.
these two after the break, but let's stay focused on the narrator stuff. We'll come back to this.
Come back to what? Back
the
to
Talos
this
Principle.
Okay,
and
yeah, whatever. Yeah.
That stuff.
So the last thing I wanna push. This is probably as far as I'm gonna go.
I doubt it, but
all right. I could go really far, but this is as far as I'm gonna go in this podcast. So I said that you could separate these two things. I think you can definitely separate the narration and have it be a standalone entity as like a storytelling mechanic. And the reason I say this is because no part of my emotional response, no part of my understanding of the characters, no part of my good feeling or bad feeling or motivations in the game actually came from moving blocks and jumping blocks on top of one another.
But let me ask you this question. So would you make the same criticism about something like Bastion that also has a narrator in a very similar way, kind of explaining what's going on around you? If you removed the narration from that game, would you have the emotional response? Because I know you love that game.
I do love Bastion.
So are you saying like removing the actual voice actor or removing the narration in total? So you don't have subtitles, you don't have any of that additional context?
What I'm saying is keep subtitles, but remove the fact that the narrator was so strong or that there was narration at all. Because there didn't have to be narration at all. There were actually a couple different ways that story was told in this game. We're going to talk about the AI stuff later, but remember there were like little blurbs when you change levels that told you a different story, that gave you new information. We'll talk about that later, but a game like Bastion, I am controlling a character that is doing way more than just jumping on blocks. They are meeting characters and having dialogue, and they're traveling to new exotic places, and they are, completing objectives and changing the environment. And this is happening here too in Talos Was Alone, but it's not the same. So when I talk about, so let me throw out another example that I think will serve the same purpose, right? One of the games that I know and love more than any other game is the Legend of Zelda series, right? So I'm going to talk about Ocarina of Time because pretty much everyone has played this game or knows about it, right?
Yeah, totally. Everyone has, including me. I totally have played it. Yes.
Ocarina of Time?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm not lying. Yeah, totally. I've definitely played it.
All right, if you didn't play it, I played it in a room with you in one sitting for 17 hours, so you should have gotten enough out of this game, all right?
That's the saddest story I've ever heard.
It was for charity.
It was for charity.
All right, that makes it better.
Okay, so look, I play a game like Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It's got a great story. Someone could just take a script and read it in audiobook format, and it would be fine. But you get something very specific from being a child Link, pulling a sword out of a pedestal, becoming an adult. Like you get something for doing these actions as the player, right? I didn't get anything from my achievements with block jumping or block stacking. My achievements in being a good block stacker or block mover didn't really lend to my emotional response to the game. My emotional responses were amazing in a game like Legend of Zelda or Bastion, where I'm defeating a big enemy and my successes drive the story. My block stacking didn't do it for me.
So I have to jump, Gino, before you start. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead first.
Gino, do you picture Billy as a child with like a whole bunch of blocks, like literal building blocks in front of him, puts them together and just says, "This does nothing for my emotional development," and then just walks.
Yes, and then knocks them down.
Yeah,
and then I pick up Legend of Zelda, and I'm fulfilled.
These blocks are full of hubris. They have grown too high. The higher you stack, the farther you fall. Blocks.
Down Tower of Babel.
Down you go.
All right.
I mean, so if we're gonna just dive into my childhood, we can open a can of worms. But
no thanks. Not today. But I guess this would raise the question: how much do you think the minimalism impacted you, Billy? Because it sounds like, for me, the minimalism did a whole lot of work. I enjoyed the block stacking. I got the metaphor out of it. I thought that, what's her name? Sarah? Yeah, Sarah being super spastic in her movements and her behavior and also in personality, that did a lot for me. So I thought that the minimalism actually brought forward some of the subtler aspects of their design, and it actually made it resonate with me more. But it sounds like for you, if they looked like actual people, or if the enemies looked like actual, enemies.
There were
in
no
a
enemies,
traditional game. But if the cloud looked
Right, yeah,
like,
if the cloud.
Some pig wizard like Ganondorf, if he looked like something like that, you would have gotten more out of it than it being a cloud. Or the characters, if Thomas looked like a normal dude and then Chris was like short and squat, he was like Joe Pesci.
Okay. Or Danny
Joe
DeVito.
Pesci were literally doing motion capture for this game.
Oh, Joe Pesci motion capture would be pretty funny.
All
That's
right.
his jump.
So I'm trying to answer your question without just saying the same thing I said before over and over again. No.
But do you think the minimalism was what did it?
The minimalism wasn't what did it. I think it was that the gameplay itself was fun, but it was the least. I think it was actually, and this might be controversial. I think it was the least dynamic of the game. I think it was pretty predictable from the very first couple levels of the game. I could kind of just tell where this was going from the whole, like, I guess as soon as I met John, I said, okay, I know where this is going. We're going to just keep getting we're going to introduce new characters basically every level. Then every level's got that theme, use that character's ability to advance. And maybe that took a little bit away from me. Not like it's that game's fault, but just the way it struck me made me have a different experience. I'm not ready to fault the game for that and say the game's not good. I'm just saying my response ended up being a little bit different.
Sure, but how different is that from something like The Legend of Zelda, where if you're in a certain temple, you're going to use the item you found in that temple.
Get a hook shot, get a Megaton hammer.
And you're just going to keep using that, and you're going to see all the different applications of that thing. I think it was very – like, for example, when you get inverted Thomas, James. I thought that it was going to be a lot of situations where James is operating on trying to go down and Thomas is trying to go up. But the first time I used James and Thomas to jump at the same time and end up with Thomas on top and James on the bottom.
So they were like floating together? Yeah.
They were canceling each other out, basically, and you could just move vertically and horizontally.
You basically had flight
freely.
at that point.
You could fly at that point. Once you put those two together and you had a completely new ability, it like blew my mind for a little bit. Like all of a sudden, height and distance don't matter anymore. I can do whatever I want.
Teamwork.
In this space. Because teamwork.
I agree. That moment probably did the most for me. That moment probably did the most for me, finding out that James and Thomas could do that. Where I'm going to say, okay, like almost every video game has progression like that. Metroid games, get Ice Beam, get Plasma Beam, get whatever, and you can do new stuff. In Volta Story, you get Wall Jump, you get a Blink ability, you get Double Jump, you get whatever, and you can go to new areas. In a Legend of Zelda game, you get a new item, you go to a new dungeon, you do new stuff, go to new areas. In this game, you get new blocks, your jumps get better, you do more stuff. Sure. But for this game, I don't know, it didn't put in enough work. And I'm not going to say the game is bad. I'm still not ready to say the game is bad for this. I'm really trying to isolate that for me, and I'm sure other players that are like me probably going to have a different emotional response.
You, Billy.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's that the game is, I mean, it's not a very triumphant kind of, it's not a power fantasy. It's not
let me just back up and try to get some stronger.
Being rectangles.
Like my overall opinion was that it was a beautiful piece of art game. Narration, solid. Gameplay, solid. It all works together, right? Yeah.
The discussion we're having is totally fine. I'm not taking this as like a harsh criticism.
Right.
I'm just trying to get at the root of the disconnect between my experience with it and yours. Because it seems like the things that I really appreciated were the things that didn't strike you. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering if it is something about the narrative or something about the way it's presented, like where it lost you.
Well,
the thing that hit me the most...
Grind.
There was no grind.
There was no grind. Like, I couldn't just grind levels. I couldn't get every collectible. Actually, I could, and I did get every collectible. But that was too easy. Right? I actually got 100% achievements in this game.
Was it a lack of a depth of gameplay, or was it that it didn't stick you on a treadmill to play the same thing?
I just want to have to play the same level 4 times in a row to get 100%. No, all right, let's just get real for a second. What struck me the most was the strength of the narrator's vocal performance, comic timing in general of when story was presented to the game. Like
it's really well paced.
It's perfectly paced. The actual pace of the story was amazing, and this comes from a background that I've had for a long time. When I was in high school and early college, I did tons of theater, and I was forced to be the sort of comedy person because I was the only person that understood timing.
I thought he was going to say I was forced to be the narrator because they didn't want me on stage.
No.
Oh, no.
That would have been a little sad. That probably would have
you just stand in the back of
that probably would have changed my worldview.
I was I was a rectangle once, and I just can't tolerate them anymore.
So, because I was forced to do the comic timing and have a lot of control over the pace of theatrical work that I've done in the past, I can appreciate a good performance, and this was that.
Yep. All right, cool.
I'd like to... I just want to venture small theory about the narrator, little one, story related.
Yep, go ahead.
So, in my mind, the narrator's not really he has to be separate from these triangles, right? It's sort of a third person option. Squares?
There are no triangles.
Oh my goodness.
If I saw a triangle, I would have been freaked out. I wouldn't be ready for it.
All right, from these...
circle? Oh my god.
Curves? He has to be...
I would have been fine with a trapezoid or something. That would have been fine.
At least it still has 4 sides.
Trapezoids ain't natural.
Trapezoids are quadrilateral.
Parallelogram would have been fine.
Fuck. We need to stop talking about other shapes.
How about a rhombus? Fuck you up, dog.
Well, rhombus are just parallelograms. So...
Squares are rhombuses. Yeah. Ah!
Rhombus is parallelogram with 4 equal sides.
Yeah.
You're right. That's sound geometry.
Chris is a rhombus. That's why he's terrible.
Because he's a rhombus. So,
Chris is actually a right rhombus, if you're going to be super technical.
Like shapes. So, narrator has to be separate, third person omniscient, right? You get that one, we're going to talk later about those little in-between things, but you get the little in-between level thing where it's like they know these people escaped, right? They recognize it. Outside society's aware of it. So, is the game we're playing sort of a quasi-religious parable about, or let's say a historical parable even, of these people escaping? I shouldn't say people. Of these rectangles escaping.
Of these AIs?
You shouldn't say people.
I think this is a social myth that we're then being retold from the future.
I think that's a reasonable reading, considering in the later parts of the game, is it Peter? Is it Peter? Or what's the super religious one?
Paul? He's not religious. What are you talking about?
Well,
Paul is telling them about the architect. He tells Team Jump about the architects, and then the Team Jump looks to Paul as a religious leader.
That's true.
So the architects.
I think you're reading into that wrong.
No, it says that Team Jump looks. Yes, Paul is the spiritual leader to Team Jump. Team Jump looked at him as a spiritual leader.
All right, fine. I'm gonna have to concede that one.
All right, fine.
I see you wrote notes. Touche.
You've directly quoted the game to me.
So I think that it's an okay reading, especially because they're telling you about the architects and those bits of narration between the different chapters kind of say we had never thought that something would break out, and then those first 7, and it's kind of telling you that these first 7 are super important, and they sacrificed themselves so that other AIs could escape, and the whole 9 yards.
Really the religious imagery, for how much it could be across a game of quadrilaterals, there is a lot of religious imagery there.
I don't see any.
7?
All right,
there's 7.
We will come back and discuss religious imagery and some of the other crossovers with the Talos Principle and AIs.
Do we need a
break?
break? Yeah, we should take a little break. So lead us out, Gino.
All right, so after our break, religious imagery, Talos Principle, AIs. AIs are people too.
No, they're not.
People too.
No.
Occupier people too. Maybe plants even. Who knows?
People are people too.
People are people. This is true. All right, we'll be back in a bit. Peace. And we're back with our episode on Thomas Was Alone. Deep listens, talking about stuff. So when we left off, Billy, you didn't see religious imagery in Thomas Was Alone. Pete, you seem to see it all over the place. So, Pete, why don't you explain where you saw it, and then Billy can say, no, that wasn't true.
All right, let's run it down. All right, so 7 quadrilaterals to start with, right? When you think about sort of what are the biggest religious numbers, right? You have 3, you have 12, and you have 7, right? 7 deadly sins, 7
Those
cardinal
are
virtues,
the 3.
right?
Yep.
But even beyond that, the story is a retelling, basically, of the harrowing of hell, just with quadrilaterals instead of Jesus, if that's sort of...
Okay, why don't you explain that story?
Right on that. So the harrowing of hell is where Jesus goes down to hell and releases all the souls trapped there, right? And sort of Spark Notes summary, right? So this is a story of 7 quadrilaterals sacrificing themselves to free the rest of the AIs trapped by the splitter in their little individual cages, right? It's sort of a paradigmatic religious tale of self-sacrifice to redeem a larger population, let's say.
Okay, sure. I can see that.
Thank you.
Does Jesus have to, like, climb on top of, like, another block and then... climb on top of another dude, and that dude can like jump real high, but Jesus can't jump real high. So,
well, Jesus is basically Claire in this scenario, right? He can walk on water.
There we go. That's the parable.
The religious imagery is so rich.
And look, I mean, you have a game about jumping squares, right? For a game about jumping squares, it's it's a religious archetype. It's an archetypal myth, let's say, whether it's religious or not.
Yeah, the self-sacrifice, and I guess Thomas would be the Messiah because he gets
he recruits his apostles.
He recruits all the apostles, and then he is the one who ultimately touches the font of knowledge, which is the internet, and comes back knowing what they must do.
Are you going to hit me with like a tree of knowledge analogy later, Pete?
Yeah, look, you could do Judeo-Christian exegesis all day.
I mean, the internet is represented as a light from the sky, blossoming with I think it's pictures of people.
Yeah,
that come
it's
down
like pictures of web pages and like images and stuff like
but it's
images
on
and
high.
Text. It is on high.
It is a fountain. They actually refer to it as the fountain, I think, at some point.
I think so. Yeah, I think Sarah does.
So look. I'm not saying that there's no room for religious themes in games. Totally fine. I'm down with that. But I made the same argument, or a very similar argument, when we talked about Talos Principle. I think Gino was saying that there was a lot of religious undertones, and that this was a really core part of the game.
I mean, it's overtones.
What I don't know.
Yeah.
Overtones, undertones.
You lost that discussion in Talos Principle. Let's just get that straight. It's a religious game.
I said it wasn't a religious game because
you were wrong.
The main voice is Elohim. It's God in Hebrew.
Look. Okay, I don't want to repeat that discussion. I wanted to repeat the stance that I took. Was that sure? There may be elements that are religious, and Talos Principle was a much harder battle to fight because there were literally a character named God in the game that was talking to you from the sky.
There's argument an achievement called Fight the Serpent.
The argument that I was making was that what the game was trying to make you think about was not religious stuff. It just used that as a framework to achieve a different goal, and that goal was not religious. Okay, so I think the goal that Thomas Was Alone was trying to achieve was also not a religious goal. That you could tell the exact same story and get the exact same intellectual stimulation if you didn't have any religious input into this scenario. And you could do the same thing with Talos Principle. If you just took away the whole Elohim and it's like ancient Greek and then Egyptian god stuff and then whatever, and you made it like a, let's just put it in like a BioShock Rapture kind of world where there was literally no gods or kings, only men, but instead it was only androids, right? Do something like that, and I think there's actually a game coming out like that soon. I actually think that there's a game that's being made kind of like that. It just came to me, but I think there's a game coming out that like a trailer got released for that's similar to that. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. What I want to say is Thomas Was Alone, even though sure maybe have some religious, you could read some religious things into this game. This game is asking you about what it would be like to be born as an AI with just like a
That's
couple of
square.
traits. I mean, basically, we see Thomas's birth into the world, or his extremely beginnings, like his extreme beginnings, and all he does is sit there and observe what's around him, much like what an infant would do if an infant had a computer's level like data storage from second one out of the womb, right? If you imagine what a baby would actually do, like a newborn child would do, if it could think and remember and like catalog data the same way Thomas could, it'd be extremely similar to what Thomas was doing. All right, I exist. All right, sweet. What can I do? Roll around? That's dope. Can I grab things with my hands? Nice. I want to do this to other things and see what happens.
Slash goo goo.
Yeah, slash goo goo gaga. And Thomas was doing that. Thomas was essentially what a baby would be if they had computer peripherals to work with. Right? He said, hey, I've solved the problem of only being stuck to the ground. I could do this thing called jumping. Cool. Right?
Okay,
So that's what I think the story is about. And then when it gets to the end of the story, what do sentient beings, I'm not going to call them people yet, what do sentient beings do in a situation like this? They make a selfless act, which sure, religious stuff often talks about selfless sacrifice actions, but this is just being presented with a choice, a rational choice, and they make a decision to do something that's more thoughtful to others and selfless, which I think is a very human thing, not necessarily a religious thing. So Pete, I'll let you take back the discussion.
Yeah, no, Billy, I think your argument makes a lot more sense for Thomas Was Alone than it did for Talos Principle.
It's so hard to do Talos Principle. Thomas Was Alone's a way easier battleground.
Yeah, but I think my point was more, not that Thomas Was Alone is an inherently religious game, just that it's interesting that sort of, you think about sort of the numbers of stories we have, and the vast majority of them fit certain archetypes, right? They're sort of, I think it was maybe Carl Jung. I forget exactly.
Yeah, that's a Jung deal.
Yeah, it's like the fact that the story, it's a very small story just about quadrilaterals, and yet it still fits these sort of Jungian redemption, hero's journey archetypes, is my larger point. Whether they're religious or not is really secondary at this point.
Yeah, and you could also say that those religious tales are not necessarily about religion either. They're about living your life in a certain way.
Heroes,
they're didactic parables.
Redemption. Yeah, exactly.
And I guess if you want to go in the religious tiff, a lot of these names are Christian names.
Yeah.
Paul, Christopher,
Sarah.
Not all of them, but
Paul,
some
John.
of them are. Gray's not one.
Team Jump.
Team Jump. Everyone remembers when Team Jump wandered through the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. So I think since we've brought up the Talos Principle multiple times, I think it's really interesting to talk about how these games both approach AIs and approach sentient thought inside of a computer. Talos Principle kind of starts at, are you sentient at all? And kind of questioning whether you are. And the character you're controlling has no inherent personality other than your own and the input you put in. So you're kind of authoring your own character as you're playing when you interact with the Milton library assistant. Whereas Thomas Was Alone kind of comes from the approach that these are people from minute one, and you're kind of made to just kind of accept their personhood. Instead of, for example, in the Talos Principle, all of the AIs are named in such a way that you are meant to not see them as people. Like you have the shepherd. They have almost PC handles, like usernames, instead of human names. I think, isn't dog one of them? Dog like 001 or and Samsara and all these names that some of them have meanings, but they are usually not something you would expect a human being to call themselves. Whereas every character in Thomas Was Alone, except maybe Gray and Team Jump, have ordinary names, fairly common, at least English names.
Yeah.
And so that kind of allows you to just understand, oh, this is Thomas. Thomas is really optimistic. He has a really cool outlook. And other than the fact that he's a quadrilateral, he's a little rectangle, you can kind of understand who Thomas would be as a person. You could like as you said earlier, anthropomorphizing Thomas is really easy.
Yeah.
Whereas even though characters like Samsara and the Shepherd they physically look like people, they seem to have less personality. than these characters do, because they can be funny, they can be sarcastic, they can be all these different things. What do you guys think about that?
I'm curious, again, if we sort of tie this into the minimalist discussion, if this is sort of a less is more situation, right? Like if you think about the Talos Principle, you had so many different questions, so many different issues, right, that you couldn't sort of latch on to anything. But when you look at Thomas, you just think, oh, that's Thomas. He's optimistic. Optimistic is something a person would be, right? So the fact that you just have these very simple, definable, graspable, let's say mental or emotional states makes it easier for you then to extrapolate from there. You have a firmer building block from which to start.
Sure, and I think that by focusing on this core group of characters and showing them over and over and over again and developing, whereas the Talos Principle takes, other than reading comments on walls, like you don't see the other characters interacting with one another, other than if you read like certain comments one after another. And so it can be hard to keep characters straight in the Talos Principle and kind of understand their growth and their development. Whereas in Thomas Was Alone, you have to physically play out them interacting with one another. And I think that definitely lends a narrative cohesion to it, especially since you can't miss character development moments. The Talos Principle is so big and sprawling that it's possible to just not even notice that a character existed.
Do the quadrilaterals speak to each other? It seems like the narrator seems to suggest it in the second half.
Yeah, the narrator implies that they're talking to one another.
But they never actually do.
No.
There's never actual dialogue.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
The narrator will imply that, like, Gray is lying to Joe and Sam.
Yeah, or Joe and Sam got in an argument about Joe's behavior at some point in the past. I think that happened as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, so Billy, did you have anything about how these AIs are presented?
So the only thing that I would push back on is that you said that they're presented as people from minute one. And from real minute one, there's one of those little blurbs that talks about AI. So I thought of Thomas as being an AI minute one, not a person minute one. But that's sort of splitting hairs.
Yeah. Sure, but
Do
I think that the way they
rectangles have
represent...
hairs?
What?
Do rectangles have hairs to split?
None of the ones we saw,
Okay.
but maybe there's one that has that power.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. And I thought that also Billy, if you're trying to talk, your mic's off again. Okay.
I have like
we'll
a bad
disregard
cough, so I'm muting frequently so I don't cough on you guys.
Okay, great. Internet coughs are the worst kind. It is, I think, kind of cool that in this, even though you have this story about AIs freeing themselves and moving on and trying to attain, in this case, it's freedom, not necessarily humanity or personhood, like it is in the Talos Principle. It's interesting that the way that these stories play out is so different. That in the Talos Principle, it's all about self-improvement. At the end, you do need to kind of interact with other AIs to ascend, but it's about proving that you deserve to be a person. Whereas Thomas Was Alone takes the stance that these are people, and they all have their own distinct goals that can conflict. They can be measured against one another, and sometimes they can be mutual. Like Chris wants to be with Laura. That's something that he wants very drastically. John wants to be admired, and he needs other people to be around. And that for these characters, for the most part, their goals are inherent upon society existing and being measured against other characters. Whereas in the Talos Principle, you're trying to become kind of an Ubermensch. You're trying to become this one perfect being who will ascend above all others. And I think it's a very cool way that even though you have this basic AI setup, they are all coming together and not coming together. They're actually having very different conclusions from this similar structure. I actually thought it was very cool that a lot of these characters, even though they start out feeling like they're going to be alone and they have an understanding of who they are and what they want, it's when other characters start getting pulled away from them that they realize that their self-definition is predicated on seeing their differences from others. So Sarah, when she has no one to float across places, she feels less Sarah.
You mean Claire?
Yeah, Claire. Sorry, my mistake.
Yeah, it's fine.
Claire. When Claire doesn't have someone to shepherd, she's like, what is a superhero without people to protect? So if she's alone, she doesn't feel like Claire anymore. Or John, John at a certain point, he realizes he's jumping so high and he kind of feels like he's being held back by the other ones. But at a certain point, he comes to the conclusion that the other dots were there to extend his reach, that even his high jump cannot get him to where he needs to go. And when he finally meets Sarah, he has a realization that Sarah's jumps dwarfed his jumps, and he's humbled because he finally met another character who can jump even higher than him, and he realizes that there's a breadth to the world that he didn't even anticipate. And it's really cool how they texture all that stuff together.
Right. There's multiple layers of character development, and they happen at different parts of the story. Actually, Chris is one of the most like bitter, kind of crabby, negative characters. But towards the end, when people start getting eaten by the pixel cloud, he's like, wait, that guy wasn't so bad after all. I kind of liked him. And, he definitely grew attached to Laura, and he grew attached to some of the other characters too. And everything sort of worked out. There was team synergy. Everyone kind of liked each other, even though some people were, came in later, maybe were less a part of the group because they came in later. I think like Sarah probably is the most disconnected because she, I think, was the last person to join.
Yeah.
So like Sarah and James are probably more peripheral, but still, like there's some family there.
Mm-hmm. And also, another theme that ties the Talos Principle and this together is the idea of leaving things behind for future generations. The idea of there
Posterity.
being posterity, and also a physical inheritance, like an inheritance of physical traits. In the Talos Principle, it's passing on knowledge that's getting carried forward, like through comments and through notes, that when one AI dies, it passes on that knowledge to its offspring, and then that child program gets a little bit further, and then they'll attain something in the distant future. And in Thomas Was Alone, Laura at one point realizes that she's probably not going to make it because her jump's terrible. But if her ability to bounce other characters higher than she can reach herself can be passed on, she'll feel like her life had meaning. And so this idea of AIs propagating like organic beings replicates itself again.
And that's something that really struck me about Thomas Was Alone, is it sort of fits in with the idea of how, if we ever get, let's say, conscious AIs, that they might not be something we're able to design. They might just have to emerge at some point, right? Like the theory of neural nets, where you just sort of feed data in and it establishes sort of by itself these connections based on the way you correct it. Like you're not directly putting in inputs, it's creating them their own. Or there are other things you can do with code where you just sort of toss these lines of code in and they mutate and join up with each other until it's basically like only one survives, right? So this idea of sort of consciousness emerging in Thomas Was Alone, whereas he was very purposive in Talos Principle, was just something I found very attractive about the latter game. Thomas Was a former? What order did I do him in? The former
Latter.
Thomas Was Alone. Latter?
Latter comes later. Former is...
Yeah, I know.
So I actually agree with Pete here. I liked that in Thomas Was Alone, it was more of a birthing, like a genesis of awareness.
Ooh, genesis, a religious word.
Just counter
Here
my
we are.
entire previous argument. Okay, so I liked that the awareness and person-like qualities, though I'm still not going to call them people, person-like qualities came from experience.
You look Thomas in the eye and tell him he's not a person.
I will.
You look
right
him
now.
in the corners. You tell him he's not a man.
Look him in the right angles and I say, "You're not a person."
No, sir.
Thomas. No, so in Talos Principle, it was so deliberate. The whole story of Talos Principle was, we're going to create androids and do it so many times until we finally get what we're going to classify personhood status in an AI. Here in Thomas Was Alone, we have AI, and it's almost an anomaly. Like, this should not have happened. And we should talk about those little blurbs now, if we haven't already. I think we haven't talked about
Sure.
them yet.
I
We
think
should talk about those.
we brought them up.
Yeah. So there was a narrator, there was gameplay, right? We didn't talk about this. There were these little blurbs between each level. And let's talk about what is actually kind of going on in Thomas Was Alone. You have Thomas, and then through a series of levels you get more characters. But what are they actually doing? They're moving up and to the right. It's like the general goal, right? So but why? We get word that there's this fountain of knowledge, and now our characters have a directive. They're saying, hey, I want to go see this fountain of knowledge. The person that actually tells us about it is Sarah, I think, tells us about the fountain of knowledge. Laura tells us about the pixel cloud, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we get all the way up from Thomas, Chris, John, Claire, Laura tells us about the pixel cloud, right? So the first 4 characters give us nothing about an objective. Character 5 gives us the pixel cloud, which is sort of the first antagonist, really. Not really antagonist, but like negative entity. And the pixel cloud's purpose is they like gobble up rogue AI, right? So the other AIs get gobbled up. They meet James, and they also meet Sarah afterwards. So what is happening outside of the gameplay, what's actually happening is Thomas, Chris, John, Claire, and Laura all have the ability, if they can, to get out of the computer system and sort of like become active in the world. I think.
Yeah, do they join? I think. What do they merge with?
I think they just like manifest, or they enter into some robot body, or they materialize like you would do the opposite of what Tron does.
Okay.
I don't know if it's materialized because at the end of the game,
rezzed. I don't know.
the screens start becoming white.
Yeah.
The monitors change color.
Whatever it is, they reach a new level of existence.
Yeah, they get out of whatever the holding program is. They get into the internet.
They get out. Once you get gobbled up by the pixel cloud, that option's removed. You can never get out. Once you get gobbled up by the pixel cloud. Mm-hmm. So everyone gets gobbled up. The original 7 archetypes they get gobbled up, and now they say, well, okay, we can't leave. But what we can do is reach this source of information, reach the source of this program, and then edit this computer world so that all of the other AIs can get out. That's what
inheritance Gino was talking about.
That's what their goal is. So we're talking about these little blurbs, right? These little blurbs give us bits of information that are what's going on in the outside world. Okay, so we have bits of information from like the programmers and the developers and even like janitorial staff or something of like who's in this facility saying, like we knew something like this might happen. These AIs might escape. We didn't really plan for what happened. We kind of knew it might be a problem, and then it did. Oh shit!
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then you also have a character, Ryan, I think is the character's name.
Yeah,
is
Ryan.
A person that speaks in a lot of these blurbs, and if I recall correctly, Ryan's like an AI rights activist or something.
Yeah.
I hope I'm remembering that correctly. Ryan tells stories of like the AI rights movement and how people study the acts of Thomas and the other architects, and like that's like kind of mind-blowing to me that there's even more layer of stories. So now that I think about this game more, it's almost like Thomas Was Alone was the story of layers, of layered story.
Yeah, it's got a lot going on. One of the things I really loved was when they're planning to basically start changing the environment to help other AIs escape. I really enjoyed Thomas. There's a narration that says Thomas was sick of the obtuse puzzles. He would empower the AIs above. That I think it's kind of a critique on game design. That it's all obtuse puzzles and nonsense that's supposed to test you for no good reason. And I think that again ties into the Talos Principle, which is all obtuse puzzles for the sake of what? It says it's training for something, but to what end? And Thomas just says, like, no, we're good enough. We are whatever we need to be, we are.
We are.
So these stupid puzzles don't matter. I'm just going to cut them away so that these these AIs that are intelligent enough, they are good enough to be out and be free. I'm going to set them free instead of making them run through these stupid tests that are purposeless. And so I think that was a very cool little bit.
Yeah, a little meta critique.
Little meta critique of game design. Yeah. Do we need to run people through all these things, or should we try to empower them in some greater way? And so I guess, Billy, do you want to talk about personhood versus AIs? And because you seem to not like when AIs think they're people.
Yeah, AIs can think they're people all they want, but that ain't happening. I mean, I have a very specific
Billy's a substance dualist.
Yeah, bro. Yeah, you called me out. I mean, straight up. That there is a word for what I am. That's actually 2 words.
Hey, Billy, one of you explain what a substance dualist is, please.
It's not going to happen. Like, we just don't
explain.
Don't need to. Okay, all right.
It's basically a belief in souls in its simplest definition.
Okay, that's
There's
not
a
100%
material
accurate.
and immaterial part of every person.
So if Paul can be a spiritual leader, soul,
but he doesn't.
Does
have
a spirit have to exist?
All right, so.
Can you leave spirits?
Here's my basic rub, right? Here's my basic problem. I'm all about this kind of story. I love this kind of story. I love when AI gets brought up and whether they're not their persons or not is brought up, and we say person and personhood and we don't mean human. Pete agrees with me here, like person and human should be different, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So we agree on that. Like, being a human doesn't make you a person necessarily. Being a person doesn't necessarily make you human. Like, there's not a one-to-one parallel.
The second half.
Well, yeah, I don't know which one holds more true for you or me for that matter, but there's a disconnect between personhood and humanhood, right? And I want AI to not achieve personhood.
Billy's going to stop them at all costs.
It's pretty obvious that AI are not going to achieve humanhood. Like that's like a boring discussion. AI are not going to get like DNA and flesh and bone and stuff like that. That's not what AI are trying to get. AI don't really care about that. They care about personhood status, right?
We don't know. We don't have AIs that are capable of asking these hard questions yet. But these games sure do imply that AIs care about passing on their genes, or in this case, actually in Thomas Was Alone, it's kind of genes. At a certain point, you get to characters who they can actually move through fields that will imbue some of the powers.
Well, they're
that
actually
other
progeny.
have.
Like, they're actually the second generation of the original characters.
Yeah.
So they are just...
Gray is, in fact, the second generation of John.
That's what I thought. Okay, because he looks like John and has the same movement.
Yeah. Joe is the second generation of Thomas, and Sam is the second generation of Chris.
But Paul
is
older.
Paul is totally new.
Also on the past.
What's Team Jump in all of this?
Team Jump is nothing. Unfortunately,
Team Jump is everything. You don't say that about
All right, no. Okay, so Team Jump, I think, would be
the future.
I don't know. Okay, I'm just not.
It's the same size. They're the same size as Chris, but they have they jump.
They're smaller than Chris.
They're Team Jump.
The whole thing is, if only I was more like literature knowledgeable, I would come up with a better analogy of what they are. But they're like the dumb sidekick that actually doesn't do anything, but have like a gimmick or something in the story.
Yeah.
AIs versus people. I don't want to get too deep into this because this is a conversation that's been happening for years. I'm talking decades, right? What did I like about Thomas Was Alone? I'm okay with AIs having person-like goals, person-like tendencies. What I don't want to give AIs ever is personhood status. It's almost like denying them a position in a certain class or race, almost. Like, it's almost like I'm like an AI personhood racist. That's like pretty strong to say. So I'm just gonna say it myself, so no one else calls me that.
So what you're saying is you and Ryan, the AI rights activist, would have problems.
We would be on diametrically opposed sides. Okay, so look, let's get really serious.
Turing test.
Okay. Let's get more serious than AI racism. Okay.
More serious than AI racism. I have a problem with giving AI what I call personhood status. I think there's something very special about person, and this is where Pete and I disagree. Pete is not going to grant the same like mysticism or like special prestige to having personhood. I do grant something very special to personhood because it affects other areas of my worldview. When I say worldview, I mean like the collection of philosophical beliefs and tenets that I, have built my understanding of, how things are around. So one of those things is that personhood needs to be special, and there has to be some separation that AI and AI and humans have different ways.
What you're saying is it's not that you think that anything that the AIs have demonstrated has shown you that they are less than us. It is that you need them to be less than us to maintain some other aspect of your worldview.
That's not far from the truth, actually. So,
the point would be that the AI couldn't show Billy anything. There's nothing they could show Billy.
There's nothing they can do that would make me say Thomas is a person in the same way that I'm a person. There's nothing that Thomas could do.
Substance dualist.
There may be substance dualists out there that
think
that Thomas could be a person one day, maybe, but I don't. So here's what I like.
So
I wanted to get to what I liked and what I didn't like. I liked that they had selfless acts. I think that's totally fine. And AI can have an act of selflessness, and AI can have an act of realization and self-discovery. Sure, that's fine. Those aren't the things that are essential and sufficient to make personhood a thing. So I'm going to grant them bits and pieces, but no matter how good you make them,
you just need them to be less than you.
See, I'm trying to get serious and not go to that joking AI racism talk.
No, but what you're saying is there's an aspect of your worldview where you need those things
not
to
less,
never
just
equal.
Different. See, where you're wrong is saying less.
Okay.
They're never going to reach the, impossibly complicated list of requirements to become a person, but maybe they don't care. Maybe they can do better, because let's just be clear. An AI can try as hard as they want to be a person, and maybe they fool somebody. A human could never trick a computer into thinking it's a computer. Because as soon as a computer asks a human to calculate 20 million different possibilities in 5 seconds, human's going to say, just kidding, I'm not a computer, sorry. That's why chess computers are so good, is because they can calculate millions of possible moves in split seconds, and humans can't do that.
As a programmer, computers are dumb.
You're right.
Computers are real dumb.
Right. Yeah, computers sometimes are dumb, but computers are what I'm saying is a human could never fake it trying to be a computer. We lose instantly.
It'd be really easy to, given tools, humans can use tools. Computers as they are now, when a computer executes code, all it is doing is reading from a script and doing exactly what you tell it to do. So tricking a computer into doing something, you already know what their script is. You already know what you have to tell it. So I don't think that you already know what the computer's looking for. So it's not really that hard to trick.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, because we are getting close to our time on the podcast, but let me just ask, maybe this will be easy for me to have a discussion about it. Gino, do you think Thomas, or sorry, let's not say Thomas, let's say Sam and Joe, because in reality, Sam and Joe are the only two that actually got out.
Yes.
Do you think Sam and Joe are people?
Yes.
What makes you say that?
I think they have shown the emotional depth, the emotional range. I think they have shown the ability, the cognitive ability. They have shown a appreciation for other life. They have shown a lot of things that humans do, and I don't know, other than the biological components that we ascribe to humanity. And even there, Laura and Sarah and Claire showed... Did all the female characters pass on traits and none of the male characters did, and I didn't even notice it?
No, Thomas does. They're red.
No, that's Laura.
That's Laura.
Oh.
All the female characters are the ones that pass on traits.
There's 3 female characters. There's Double Jump.
Sarah.
There's
Double
Laura,
Jump.
and there's James's.
There's green ones.
Yeah, there's green.
What?
They're green.
There's
ones.
green.
Oh, okay. James does too. Okay. I was like, did they do that? Was that a theme and I didn't even notice it?
It's because Thomas, Chris, and John don't have anything special.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so James does. But I think that they even pass things down in a certain way that it's not biological in the way we do, but they do pass on traits. And so I think that a lot of the things that the boxes you could tick are met. And I don't understand what boxes aren't getting ticked or what boxes, if you're describing humanity, I don't know what boxes aren't getting ticked that would say this isn't human, this isn't like me.
So the boxes that aren't getting ticked, they exist, and they're pretty deep, like metaphysical, metacognition boxes.
They don't exist.
They do exist,
Those
like
boxes
having
don't
first-person access to experiences.
Why would
Like
they have
they-
first-person access to?
Oh, I'm saying like Pete, you can wave your finger all you want. This is a
Pete
big
is
thing.
vehemently waving his finger. I
No
think
one
he
can
vomited.
see it in the podcast, but
I ruined
he
my
was just
keyboard.
shaking his computer like, no. All right, so one of the biggest checkboxes that I have, Gino, and I'm not going to get too deep into this because we have to just wrap it up eventually, but at least you'll see one of them, right? Is when you or I have an experience, let's say seeing the color red. There's a word for that. It's called a qualia, right? They have a word. It's the experience of seeing the color red.
The phenomenology of the mental.
Right. So
Philosophy's happening.
Yeah,
yeah,
just
so when I look at the
don't need
color
that
red
info.
and you look at the color red, stuff happens, right? Now red's pretty simple. Let's take it up a notch. Let's say
Thomas is red.
bite an apple. Okay? Gino,
A
do you
red
like
apple.
apples, Gino?
I do like apples.
All right, let's just say
Macintoshes are pretty good.
let-
They have a bad rap.
I
but
like
them.
Honeycrisp personally.
Honeycrisp are the best
Right?
apple.
all right,
Aren't-
They're objectively the best apple.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I let's just pretend that I don't like apples. There's a reason why, okay? You have
not a
a
human.
certain experience when you eat an apple, and I have a certain experience when I eat an apple. And the thing is, a computer and AI should, by the laws of how they're built and constructed, should be able to translate experience one-to-one perfectly from one mind to another, such that an AI has an experience, and they should be able to just like write that down in code and share their exact duplicated experience with any other AI that wants to download it. And I say that there's no way you can download how it feels for me to like eat an apple into your mind and know how it feels for me. There's like a special privileged first-person access that I have that is exclusive
No one else can
to me,
share.
that no one else
And
can
if
share.
anyone can share it, then
like
the
the way it is
you're
for me to
less
cut
you.
my
Yeah,
finger
then
on
Billy's
something
no longer
sharp,
a person.
or the way it is for me to smell apple pie and have like a nostalgia of my grandma,
So
whatever.
what you're saying is the ability to lose things in translation is what makes it special, like the ability to not perfectly
You're
communicate.
cheapening it by making that the only tick box.
No,
Like,
but
it
I'm
goes a
asking,
little bit
is that what you're saying?
It's not that anything gets lost. It's that I have something that no one else can have. I have an experience of what smelling apple pie in the fall, like, whatever it is to me, and I can never 100% convey that to you. I can describe it in words, in text, in music, song, poetry, whatever, but you'll never get 100% of what it's like for me, Billy Rothgar, to smell apple pie. You won't experience it the way that I will. You will only be able to experience the way Gino does. You'll
Yes,
never
but what
experience
if,
it like
what if the way you experience it and the way I experience it are so alike as to be indistinguishable?
So here's where we have a problem. You can take the exact same stuff, okay, barring hair splitting of like molecular differences, like atoms being rearranged differently. You eat a piece of chocolate and I eat a piece of chocolate. You say I like it, and I say I don't. Right? Our tongues and like body structure, barring minute differences, are almost exactly the same. Like humans are very much alike. Our DNA is really, really close, even though we look different. Our DNA is actually really, really close.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
where are you going?
And the chocolate itself is really, really close because it's just the same piece of chocolate, right? But you like it
Yes.
and I don't. Why is there a
Yes.
difference? It seems like every single variable, every single constant is the same, but why do we have different experiences? Why do we have all the same inputs and all the same circumstances, but then we get different outputs?
Okay. Let me tell you a story about how computers are made.
Okay, go for it.
A computer chip is made of silicon. The difference between the highest end computer chip in a series and the lower end, less expensive versions, they are created on the same dies. They are created with the same materials. The difference between them is that there are flaws in each chip that will cause them to overheat when run at a certain speed. The difference between the highest end chip and the lowest end chip is not manufacturing. It is not in the it is not some secret formula that makes those chips better and the other ones worse. It is sheerly the flaws on the silicon. We are trying to make all of them perfectly, and yet even with the same exact blueprints, with the same exact materials, created in the same way, we end up with chips that some just work better, some work worse, some overheat at different temperatures. And so computers also, even given all of these blueprints, everything being super similar, everything being created in the same factory in the same way, end up with physical imperfections and physical differences that cause them to have different performance abilities. So I think the hardware being different idea, like that all computers would just be identical, isn't actually true. I think that the hardware
this
on
is
computers
where
is actually...
this is where I get to cheat because I'm a substance dualist, and I think that the part of me that has those experiences is actually not physical at all.
And then there are people who have lobotomies and they can't have those experiences anymore because their physical attributes have been altered.
Or you have
that's
other
why
split
Billy has to accept the epiphenomenon of the mental.
I am so down with that.
Mental states don't have any consequences, which I can't accept.
What is that?
So that
you can't just say that.
Like, I have to pick my battle. Okay, we can't go into this. We are like already over time for the podcast. We went way
we will
deeper
probably go into this the next time we have a game with AIs because it's a theme that comes up all the time in video games.
We could just do a separate podcast on it. We could just do a little aside, just like get this out.
We're not a philosophy podcast. That's not what we do.
Who says? Come on. Who says we're not?
Okay, listeners, we're gonna close this Thomas Was Alone discussion. Last discussion of Thomas Was Alone, we're going to have after this. But if you want to hear more philosophy stuff, if you want to hear us going back and forth about philosophy,
we could really pick this apart.
We can have a bonus podcast where we
it would not interrupt the normal flow of the podcast. We'd still have other podcasts.
We would do it on the side because we don't need to play a game. We can just discuss philosophy.
We could just do this anytime.
So if you want to hear that, tweet at that Pinguino, send messages,
do all the plugs,
thatpinguino@gmail.com. Any of that our feedback methods, get at us. We will totally have that podcast. If people want to hear it, we will do it. If people don't want to hear it, we don't have to have these long asides. But
you can just delete these in the future. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that's fine. And I think that it's good to have these discussions because AI stuff came up in now 2 games in a row, or not in a row, but very close together, and they're both fresh in our minds. So it's good to have these discussions now, and they will keep coming up because video games love AI stuff. They just love it.
Also, listeners, just like tell us what you like to listen to. I mean, we're gonna talk about games and stuff, and talk about mechanics and development, all this stuff. But I mean, we also want to please you guys. So if you say
and also we're going to get sidetracked.
We get sidetracked a lot sometimes.
But we can pick the things we get sidetracked on, I guess. We could be a little more judicious about it.
Oh, my God.
But whatever.
It's like a 2-hour podcast now. Holy shit.
Yeah, because Thomas Was Alone's a really good game.
Yeah, it is.
Our podcast is almost as long as the game.
My God.
That's not true. Thomas Was Alone's like 5 hours.
Yeah.
Right. So, closing thoughts on Thomas Was Alone.
All right, so I think this game was a testament to how small...
Religious word.
I'm going to come to Penn State and just knock your teeth out, man. All right. I think this game exemplifies how one facet of a game can shine so bright that it just makes everything else. So developers, don't be afraid to just go all out on something new, because you might get a piece of narration brilliance like this game had, and it just completely makes the entire experience.
Okay. Narration, very important to Billy. Pete.
Yeah, I think it's rare you see a platformer with this sort of emotional depth, and that's sort of where the narration comes in. Like I said earlier, what really struck me is the idea of sort of AI's emergence in this case, right? The idea that consciousness just sort of emerges once the material substrates coalesce in the right way, something I'm attracted to. So my favorite portion of the game, let's say.
Very cool. And if you didn't get, the portion I love is that, every character, for as minimalistic as it is, every part of that character's design is utilized. It is just very elegant in that way, and also that these characters are shown to be in need of socializing. That so often in games you are given an antagonist, and that was something that I kind of disliked about the end of the game, that Gray is kind of shown to be this kind of antagonist, and I thought that this game didn't need an antagonist. One of the things that I loved the most about it was that there was not a traditional antagonist, that it was just these characters coming together to achieve something. Without
That's a cheap shot, man. We talked about this before, and now you're like, it's in the podcast. I'm just gonna throw this out here. Gray was his antagonist, and I didn't like it.
I mean, I didn't like that twist. It's fine. I think it made sense within the context of the story. I just found, for me, one of the largest messages of the game was that we measure... I guess you wouldn't like me saying this, but I'm going to say human beings measure each other are measured not only in how they view themselves, but in how they differ from others. And I thought that seeing these AIs come to that realization over the course of their journey was really cool. That these characters come to realize, oh, I thought that I was all about jumping, but this one can jump even better than me. And without having other characters whose jumps I can look at, my jump doesn't seem as impressive. I need people who jump smaller than me for my jump to mean something. And I thought that was very cool.
I'm not offended by you saying that.
You're not?
I'm not offended.
I'm glad.
Cool.
So
next podcast?
Yes, next podcast. Pete,
Yeah.
It's your pick.
This is a game I've been excited about, like, since I first heard about it, honestly, right? My excitement's just been building since then. But it's Child of Light, another game on Steam. I've heard good things, and I think it'll be
I've also heard about it, too.
Yeah.
We're going to get so much citrine. We're going to get citrine. We're going to get amethyst. We're going to get emeralds. It's going to be great.
I'm going to have to
Rubies
find
and
out what my
sapphires, too.
birthstone is.
Rubies and sapphires and princess gems.
You guys know what the birthstone is for May? I have no idea.
May?
It's
I can-
Nah,
you don't need to look it up. Just forget that.
The internet has the answer.
Of course
wait
it does. All right, Child of Light seems fun. I'm gonna look forward to playing that.
Yep. So next time, Child of Light. And as always, if you want to send any feedback, anything, send it to @thatpinguino on Twitter or thatpinguino@gmail.com. Or you can just, I guess, on the comments of our Libsyn page.
Yeah.
deeplistens.libsyn.com. So send the feedback, send all that stuff. Let us know if our philosophical asides are too much or too little. We'll have a separate podcast for it. We can excise it from the
Hours of content.
We could do like deep listens after hours, like
deepest
behind
listens.
the scenes, deeper listens.
Metaphysical listens.
So thank you for listening once again. We'll be back next time with Child of Light.
Child of Light.
Thanks, Billy.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to my bullshit philosophy sometimes. I liked Thomas Was Alone. I hope we play more games of this caliber because I could do this forever, guys. I swear to God.
Great, because I have no plans of stopping. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. Always nice to have an audience. Make sure you send that feedback, too.
And thank you, listeners, for sticking with us for all this. Till next 2 weeks from now. Peace.